Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and today we are joined with Dr. Rick Stedman. Dr. Rick Stedman is a collector of classic rock vinyl LPs, a bookaholic, an author, a pastor, and a devoted husband and father. He founded and for 2 decades led Adventure Christian Church in Roseville, California. He has graduate degrees in theology, philosophy, and ministry, and is the author of Praying the Armor of God and Praying the Psalms. And you can find out more about Rick at Rick Stedman, that's Stedman with no A, .com/31. Rick, welcome to the program. Well, you are the author of a brand new book that has just been released, which is entitled 31 Surprising Reasons to Believe in God, How Superheroes, Art, Environmentalism, and Science Point Toward Faith. This is a release that just came out on July the 1st from our friends at Harvard House. And the question has to be asked, Rick, why do we need more reasons to believe in God? How is 5,777 years of history, the biblical recordings from the time of Moses to the present day, the artifacts, the geology, the writings that we have, why are we still find ourselves in the business of apologetics?
Well, that's a very good question, Eric. I think the answer to that is that people today just don't care a whole lot. Secular folks don't care a lot about artifacts. They don't care about, the things that we find archaeologically so valuable. So what I prefer to do is I have found in my own life in dealing with people that have doubts about God or skeptics or even out-and-out atheists, I like to start with what floats their boat. I mean, what are they really passionate about? And people are passionate about a ton of stuff. They care about, for instance, they care about protecting the environment. They care about ending sex trafficking globally. They care about stopping cruelty to animals. And these are things that especially the young people today, and the skeptics, the media, the universities, all the people that aren't interested in the stuff that you mentioned, they care about this. They also care about art. They care about music. They care about science. And what I like to do is just start the discussion by saying, hey, let's find a point of common ground. So just give you an example, Eric. If I'm on an airplane, I sit next to somebody. If they ask me what I do for a living, and I tell them, well, I'm a pastor, let me tell you, that's end of conversation. I mean,
right.
That just scares them away. But if I tell them I'm a collector of old rock and roll LPs, wow, things just start hopping. Because guess what? Everybody grew up with some music they loved. I love doing that, Eric. I love asking people, so what's your all-time favorite, recording artist? What's your favorite band? And we establish common ground. We find that we're actually two people that live on the same planet. And we have loves and we have passions. And then I just at some point slide to that, say, well, believe it or not, music is one of the reasons I believe in God. And they say, what? I say, yeah, music is one of the reasons I believe in God. And then I sort of go into what I talk about in this book. And I agree, Eric, there's tons of things throughout history, but as I began to look around at what people are really interested in, so far I've cataloged over 100 things that I think are points of common interest where we can find clues that point toward the existence of God. And I just got to tell you, it works. It works if you start off with rock and roll, you start off with art museums, you start off with science, the scientific method, and you establish a friendship first, or just sort of a commonality that makes the rest of the conversation go a lot better.
Well, isn't that really the definition of apologetics? Is relational explanation, not scientific explanation, but relational explanation of the validity of the Gospels, of the validity of the Bible, and how it relates. And I think we missed that part, relationship. We missed it. We missed it in the book of Acts, because if you look at the church today and that last line of Acts chapter 2, and God added daily to their numbers those being saved, we don't come close to those kind of numerics. And it seems that the pattern that God gave us was relational. It was not buildings and campuses and large praise and worship teams and entertainment factor. He gave us community and relationship. Is this a part of your approach in really talking about belief and how you relate to people?
Yeah, I think you hit it the nail right on the head there, Eric. I think that Jesus was so relational, wasn't he? I mean, everyone. I especially love the Zacchaeus story. Remember, Zacchaeus was up in the tree, and Jesus walks along, and there's a whole crowd around him. And if that were some pastors today, they would be all enraptured by the crowd. They'd be twittering, or they'd be putting on Facebook, "Hey, I got 500 people here with me today, and in this city," or "Hey, we had a crowd of 1,000 today." Jesus doesn't care about the crowds. He notices the one person, and he just focuses in on him. And it even says after that the crowds are sort of disappointed he went off with him alone. I call that loving people one at a time. And for me, apologetics is about focusing on people, finding out what really drives their car, what floats their boat, what energizes them. But here's the problem, Eric. I think of a lot of apologetics. Technically, I guess the word apologetics in Greek comes from the word to make a defense.
Right.
And the problem is we get so defensive. It's like this either or, and we're defensive, and we're like, it's in this argument rather than a discussion based on something we agree upon. So I like to find these areas of common ground, these places we can stand together. And I actually think in every area, if you look deep enough, you probably can find a clue to the existence of God there. Can I tell you a story to illustrate this?
Please.
All right. So a few years ago in Northern California, where I live, I just live in the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas, where gold was discovered. A few years ago, there was a couple out walking their dog on their property, and they noticed this tin can, this old rusted tin can was protruding, on the side of the path. And the husband said, "Oh man, look it. Years ago, someone must have used this as a trash spot. I bet this is cans and junk." And he was really disappointed. So he got this stick and he started digging around with this tin can. He finally unearthed this tin can, and it was extremely heavy. They opened it up. It was filled with gold coins. I kid you not. This is a true story. They looked around. Eventually, they found 8 cans that held 14,027 gold coins, all from the 1850s, mint condition, and they've been appraised now at well over $11 million. So this couple were wealthy beyond imagination for years. But guess what? They never knew it. It was there all the time. And they were asked, after this was all found, was there any clue that buried treasure was on your land? And they said, well, actually there was. There was a clue, but we didn't know how to decipher it. Eric, in the old oak tree right next to where that treasure was buried, there was an old tin can that someone had tied to a branch. And it was so old that the branch and the tree had actually grown around most of the can. Well, that's an oddity, isn't it? I mean, if you saw
Sure.
that, that would strike your interest, right?
Of course.
And they saw that and they thought, wow, that's weird. But now that we know the rest of the story, you and I both know that wasn't just a can hanging there. That was a clue. That was a sign that the person who buried the treasure put there so he could find the right tree, right, later on, and unearth the treasure. So they had the clue in front of them all the time, but they didn't know how to decipher the clue. That's what this book's about. I believe God has placed, thousands of clues, millions of clues in our world to his existence. One way of saying it is he's hidden in plain sight, and he's double coated his existence and all these things. And as we look at music, we look at beauty. I even think one of my chapters is on horror books and horror movies. And if we look at that phenomenon in our culture, I think ultimately it's a pointer towards God.
In what way?
Well, you want to talk about horror movies specifically?
I would, because it's kind of interesting. There is a cult following in that particular genre that has drifted towards not seeing the message that I think you and I see, and that is that there is good and evil, that this zombie apocalypse, this Walking Dead are a bunch of soulless creatures who have body and spirit but no soul, and therefore are at the beck and command of some master plan, master leader. And of course, those who would take a biblical worldview would say this would be Satan, this would be what we're looking at as the army of the Antichrist, and we could go all the way down that road. But I'd be interested to see how your perspective is on this glorification in America of horror, that we have glorified it to the point that our churches are now trying to counter it with things like trunk or treat or a fall festival, feeling that if they offer an alternative, it will dissuade youth from being attracted to that kind of movie or that kind of genre. How do you approach that?
Yeah, so, well, let me start off with a question. Isn't it odd that as our culture has become more and more secular, more and more atheistic, you know how the media always talks about the nuns and, you know, all these people are converting to atheism, stuff like that. As our culture has become more and more secular, as our universities have become our public universities are almost bastions of atheistic materialism, you know, our whole culture has become atheistic. How is it that this whole horror genre has become so popular? I mean, why in this increasingly secular world is Stephen King one of the best-selling authors? I mean, he's sold more books than, I think it's John Grisham and others put together. It's astounding. Right.
It is.
And why is Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles so popular? And why on earth are teenagers so interested in werewolves and zombies? I mean, it's a really strange phenomenon. And here, I think, is the surprising hidden answer. It's sort of, it's like in psychology. In psychology, when you repress a desire, when you repress a need, it has to sublimate and come out somewhere else.
Right.
Well, God has created us with eternity in our hearts. We have a need for the supernatural in our lives. We have a need for a reality of life beyond death. But our culture has said no to that, and because we've repressed this, now it's popped up in zombies, it's popped up in werewolves, it's popped up, and basically our entertainment is fulfilling that need we have for the supernatural. But here's the twist. You know, in the superheroes area, they're all positive and it fulfills a positive need. But the horror, it has a negative twist to it. It has a destructive twist, because here's the deal. Again, in psychology, when you deny something and it comes out as a negative, it comes out in a destructive way. And what this is showing is that our secularism is ultimately destructive. And, you know, I mean, the werewolves, the vampires, the zombies, it's showing that this materialistic universe we have, all this dystopian stuff, you know, everything's ending up towards apocalypse. It's God's way of saying, hey, even if you try to live without me,
right,
you can't help but end up in apocalypse. I think it's fascinating. It's just, I mean, it all points to that modern or postmodern people can't live without the supernatural. We can't live without God in our lives, so it pops up in other areas.
You developed these 31 surprising reasons to believe in God based on experiences you've had in interacting with individuals and finding success. You certainly wouldn't be documenting a book of failure. You would be documenting a book that has become effective in a new approach, a novel approach in some ways of interweaving our natural lives and our natural inclinations and interests into a spiritual fabric that says that without these other components, you really don't have a fabric at all. You have loose strands which are totally disconnected.
Right. Well, it originally came out of a lot of my own studying philosophy, studying theology, and reading. I'm just interested in this stuff. Eric, I'm a bookaholic, like I said earlier. I just read, and I always notice these oddities. And just like that can hang in the tree, I like to notice the oddities of life. Why is that way? But I've also, as a pastor, I've been privileged to, deal with hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people. So, quite often I have a parent that comes to me and says, Rick, help! My son just went away to college and he came back an atheist. Or I have a woman that comes and she says, Pastor, help! My husband is an engineer and he thinks that I'm involved in a cult, and can you help me? And so I always say, sure, I'd love to sit down with them and talk. And I like to do it one-on-one,
right?
Because that's the relational part, right? I mean, if I don't have time to sit down one-on-one with someone, something's really wrong with my priorities. That's my perspective of ministry. Anyway, so I'll just give you one example. I met with this one guy. He was an engineer, and the first thing he said to me, Eric, was he said, well, I hope I don't offend you by these questions because you've probably never heard them before. So he started right off patronizing me.
Right.
As if I hadn't been around the block. He had no idea what I'd studied. He had no idea that I was on a PhD program in a secular university in philosophy. He had no idea of that. And I just said to him, oh, don't worry, I've probably heard them before. He said, well, I've prepared a matrix of my issues. Can you believe that? He didn't just have a list, he had a matrix. It's just so funny to me. And he started talking about stuff, and well, his big deal was science and reason. And so I said to him, well, you love the scientific method, don't you? And he said, yeah, I do. And I said, well, it's interesting. You can't prove the scientific method by the scientific method. And just silence. And I said, and in fact, according to evolution, there really aren't that great of reasons even to trust our own rationality.
Right.
Silence. And I said to him, do these topics interest you? And he said, yeah, but I've never heard anybody say that before. I said, well, would you like to read some books with me? And we could read what some authors have said. And I met with this guy. We read books together. Other people wanted to read. So I started this probably 20 years ago. I started having what I call my skeptics clubs. I just get them all together. And we just read these books, about a dozen people or so. And time after time after time, they find in the very thing they love clues pointing to God's existence. And I've had the privilege of seeing many, many of them, become believers. But it wasn't because I argued with them. It wasn't because I got defensive. It was because I took the time to find out what they were interested in. Then I found some books that discuss that topic. Like, for instance, I read an article recently by one of the greatest architects, of the last generation, and he said he thinks architecture is a reason to believe in God. Now, I went to seminary, Eric, and I was never taught that.
Of course.
But that's pretty cool, isn't it? So there's all these things that people are interested in. And I think that if we do our homework, we can figure out a way to take what they love and point them to to God's existence.
Well, that's exactly what you do in this new book, 31 Surprising Reasons to Believe in God. And I think the emphasis is on surprising, because we know the standard apologetic arguments. We know how to discuss and debate, even at the cellular level, creation. But when it comes to things like, and I've got an upcoming program on the spiritual life of Bob Dylan, happens to be very personal to me. He was born Robert Zimmerman. He's a Jewish believer. His faith walk is very personal to me, and his music is very personal to me. And he had his gospel years, and most people are not familiar that Bob Dylan is one of the most well-known Messianic Jews in the world. So I completely relate to relating to people at the level of their interest. You have to find what interests people and use that in their own vernacular. This was the reason why, as a Jew, it was so hard for me to understand Christianity, because it had its own language, and its language was foreign to my ear. I didn't understand the words that were being spoken to me. They had no meaning, and I could not relate to them. So this relational approach is, of course, what we have been promoting for a very long time, but what you've done in this new book, 31 Surprising Reasons to Believe in God, you've come across 31 really an intellectual journey, a journey that says I can pursue intellectually an understanding of what you're talking about, but if I truly take the journey, I will take it a 360-degree journey, and when I land, I'll land where I started, which was intellectual. Where I land will be spiritual.
Well, you know, you have a lot in that statement there, Eric. Let me just say that, yes, I believe that it all starts with relationships. You've got to, you know, when you get to know what someone loves, you show them respect, right? They feel respect. They don't feel like you're an antagonist or you're the enemy. So it starts with showing respect to skeptics, to non-believers, to atheists. And I think that's sorely lacking in our Christian community, and it's sorely lacking in a lot of sermons I've heard and a lot of books I've read. It comes across like they're not smart. Well, these people are brilliant people,
yes.
You know, and you got to respect that, and you got to find a way to let them know that. And then I will say that the book is, I used to call it a 1-month challenge to thinking people, but I sort of dropped that because there's a chapter on emotions. There's a chapter on grief. There's a chapter on community. There's a chapter on suffering. Mm-hmm. And these are intellectual issues, but they're also really deep, heartfelt issues.
They are.
And by the way, I gotta say, I'm a big Dylan fan. Also, I got a lot of his records, and I got all of his Christian albums. And I think that you're spot on there. That Dylan is one of many, many artists who their music points God. And I even think of bands as diverse as like the Rolling Stones with Can't Get No Satisfaction.
Right.
Goodness.
Well, I'll tell you what, mark your calendar for July 18th at 10 o'clock a.m. Central Time, and you can watch the interview with Stu Gerard, who wrote the book, The Spiritual Life of Bob Dylan, and I think that'd be something you'd be quite interested in. We're going to take a short break as we're talking with Dr. Rick Stedman about his new book, 31 Surprising Reasons to Believe in God. It is an approach that has been attempted, but I think this is an approach which is more inclusive of the here and the now, using the techniques, using the door openers of the past, the definition of are you a good person, or asking are you a good person, and that old line of questioning that we learned so long ago has not become passé. It's still very effective, still works quite well in the right setting, but you've given us some great tools in talking about some of the things that you love, some of the things that you're interested in, and some of the things that our contemporary world is interested in. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to explore some more of those surprising reasons to believe in God when we rejoin Dr. Rick Stedman after this short break. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere, and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our 1-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking today with Dr. Rick Stedman, author of the brand new book, 31 Surprising Reasons to Believe in God. And we've been having a delightful conversation about classic rock and roll vinyl LPs, talking about zombies, talking about all kinds of contemporary issues facing youth. And really, the older I get, the more I find that there are those that really never did change since high school. They've just now allowed themselves to embrace it and feel like they've reached the point where they can no longer have to look over their shoulder and be concerned that they're a great follower of Freddy Krueger, or a great follower of Stephen King, or a great follower of some of the great horror writers. Rick has provided us with not only this amazing book, but a website, Rick Stedman, STEDMAN.com. And Rick puts his books and his blog up there. You can subscribe for updates, but he also has some free resources. Help My Friend is a Skeptic. It's a free ebook you can download. His Magnus Opus, Our Next Adventure Begins. You can help join the book launch team and get the word out. And follow along with Rick as he has written several of the books. He is the author of not just this book, but Praying the Psalms, which I can tell you is, from a Jewish historical perspective, Praying the Psalms is at the core, at the very heart, at the fiber of what we would consider to be liturgical worship, and taking the journey up and ascending, walking in the footsteps of David, and finding your way into the second temple, into the first temple, and then of course into the second temple, and finding yourself taking that journey to wind up in that destination. And then he has a book, Praying the Promises of Jesus, which are also part of his repertoire, along with Praying the Armor of God. So all of these come to us from Harvest House Publishers, a great partner of our program. And Rick, we welcome you back to Revealing the Truth, and we are enjoying our conversation with you.
Thank you. Likewise.
You broke the book down into 5 parts: the ecstasy and agony of beauty, yearnings for a better world, shafts of glory, the miracle that is me, and feeling homesick at home. Can you give us a brief introduction into each one of those?
Oh, goodness. I'm not sure I have time for that. Basically, let me just say that, in philosophy, this would sort of cover the areas of beauty as the area of aesthetics, yearnings as the area of ethics, the shafts of glory, you might call that physics or science. Miracle is me is self-consciousness, and then feeling homesick at home is our longings or yearnings. I've just sort of tried to categorize these. It's a loose categorization, Eric. It's nothing. These things sort of bleed over in each other because our lives are not easily divisible. You just can't take a human being and slice and dice them. We're very complex, integrated people. But I just like to look at, for instance, in beauty, I like to look at things that are the pleasures of our life. Like we said, the books we read, the movies we watch, the sports, uh, um, even sex. Sex is such an obsession in our culture. And in that chapter, I asked why. Why are modern people so obsessed with sex? According to evolutionary materialism, it's just a way to pass on the genes.
Right.
Well, don't you think we'd figure out that that's all it is by now? But boy, our culture sure is using it to substitute for something more. And I think that is these momentary moments of transcendence. So anyway, the sections sort of group those together. And if you're a science buff, you're really going to like, that part. If you really care about social justice issues and about morality, you'll like that part. If you're an aesthete and you like music and art museums, so you can sort of gravitate to your section. And then it all comes home in the last one with really what I call the big reasons that people don't believe in God, and that has to do with suffering and loss and grief. So anyway, that's sort of an overview of the whole book.
Well, I think it's important that we really grab a hold of the concept that you are walking us through real life. This isn't something that is surreal. You're not grabbing a hold of imagery of 2,000 and 3,000 years ago. You're grabbing a hold of contemporary reality of what is affecting people's lives today. And you're giving them answers and a way to process and relate to a revelation of God, even in the trials, even in the music, even in the architecture, even in the science. And you do that in an eloquent way that engages, draws you in, it wants you to dig deeper because you want more. Now, you've had a chance to put a lot of this into practice. And there are a lot of books that are out that I would call they're great theories. I get probably 1 or 2 pitches a week. I do 780 author interviews a year, live on TV. So imagine how many pitches I get from someone who's written a book on how to witness to a Muslim. And my response to them is okay, tell me how many thousands of Muslims you've reached with this book. And they say, well, none. Well, why would I spend an hour talking to you about something that has been unimpactful? I'm sure it is wonderful, it's beautiful, it's a great argument. As you know, there's probably 1 million books published a year. I would love to talk to every author, but I've got to talk to people that are effective in what they do, in advancing the gospel message. So what you did was you took an inventory of experiences and encounters that turned out positively, where you walked away from it feeling that you had fulfilled your destiny to give a good reason for a belief in God.
Yeah, so I agree. Our church was a start from scratch. It was a church plant. Eric, our church started with me sitting behind a card table at Walmart. I had a sign that said, "How to drug-proof your kids, free booklets." That's it. I just wanted to be known as a church that gave things away.
Okay.
And as every person walked up and asked for one of the booklets, I just tried to get to know them. And over the years, that's what I do. I call it loving people one at a time, and I just try to get to know them and know what really they care about. See, here's the deal. We got all these apologetics books. I mean, you can look at Thomas Aquinas proofs and all this kind of stuff, but people, they don't care about that stuff. They care about their sports team. They care about their kids going off to college. They care about, They care about music and art, and the things they care about. Here, let me give you a great example. And I love this about the young people today. You know what young people care about today? They care about social justice. They care about, for instance, they are against sex trafficking in all corners of our world. In our town, there's a thrift store that the proceeds go to prevent sex trafficking or fight sex trafficking. There's a clothing boutique that goes towards it. There's a coffee shop that their profits go towards it. And guess what? These are all run by volunteers. These young millennials, these young adults, they will volunteer their time to serve, to help, prevent this evil or stop this evil.
Right.
And guess what? They're both theists and atheists. Both Christians and non-Christians work alongside each other in these coffee shops, these thrift stores, because they care about that. So what I like to do is I like to talk to these, especially the secular ones, the atheists, and I say, so why do you care so much about what's going on in Cambodia? And they look at me and they say, because sex trafficking of a child is just wrong. And I say to them, well, I agree totally with that, but you know what? That's really hard to support from within an atheistic worldview, because within materialism, according to evolution, cultures are just developed within. Morality and ethics are just developed within individual cultures. They're just an evolutionary device to help that culture succeed and those genes to move on. But there's no transcultural authority. Morals are just applied within a culture. They only have power within a culture, but there's no way one culture can say to another culture, hey, what you're doing is so wrong that I'm going to bring in my military or my army and stop you. But Eric, that's what we did in World War II, didn't we?
Yes.
We went into Nazi Germany and said, hey, what you're doing is so wrong in these concentration camps that we're going to use force to stop you. When we send rescue teams into Cambodia or India or Africa to rescue girls that have been trapped into sex slavery, we're saying that, hey, what you're doing is so wrong that our culture, we claim to know something is so wrong that it's even beyond culture, it's transcultural. Well, when you ask atheists, how can you defend a transcultural ethic or morality, they have no answer. Because all ethics are just culturally developed. They're no more authoritative than tradition or language. And you can't.
It's quite interesting as you bring this up. I spend a great deal of time in the Middle East, a great deal of time in Israel, a great deal of time discussing prophecy and Islam, and in that dialogue, in that conversation about sex trafficking, if you were to insert that Muhammad was promised a young girl of 6 years old as his bride, but waited 3 years to marry her at 9 years old, I would think that would evoke the most appalling response, especially somebody concerned about self-trafficking, of human trafficking, sex trafficking. That fact alone is placed properly in that dialogue is explosive. It opens up an entire deeper understanding of another world, and it's, yes, tangential to the topic of human sex trafficking, yet it shows that there is a world out there that justifies it and has built not only a theology but a lifestyle and a culture around that concept.
Yeah, but I'm not in the Middle East, so I'm not talking to those people. But the good thing is, here in America, at least, it doesn't matter if they're secular or if they're believers. They all hold the same ethic. The child sex slavery is wrong.
Right.
Well, where do we get that moral from? And where do we get the confidence that we have the right to go into another culture and tell them that what they're doing is wrong? I think it's a clear pointer to transcendent morality that can't be explained just by materialism and evolution alone.
Well, you're exactly right. What's your favorite of all your stories? What's your favorite that you like to tell about an encounter you had that not only brought joy and understanding to the person that you were sharing with, but encouraged you that you needed to go forward to share this message? You know, each one of us has that moment, that pivotal point, that not always cathartic, but something that we can look back on and say, you know, that's why I'm doing this. Do you have one of those stories?
Yeah, I mean, I've got so many people. I was very blessed, Eric, because our church grew extremely rapidly. I mean, I'm from a small church. I didn't expect that, and it grew quite large.
Right.
And so I had many people, and I live in California, so I live in a high-tech area, and so a lot of these people were computer engineers or scientists or whatever, so had a lot of that kind of stuff. But I think one of my favorite ones is this guy that was a real estate developer, and he was just this, you know, tough guy, this bodybuilder type guy, and he didn't want anything to do with church. And his wife came to me and said, well, you know, can you talk with him? And so we started meeting, and we actually started lifting weights together because, you know, he was into it, and it certainly wasn't a bad thing for me to do, you know, so we started doing that. And this guy's whole world turned upside down. Now, what really reached him were a lot of the scientific reasons, and that's one whole week in my book. But just a few weeks ago on Father's Day, his daughter posted that on her Facebook page, "Happy Father's Day, Dad," and she's so thankful for the Skeptics Club he was a part of 20 years ago that changed his life. And now the whole family and the whole, you know, kids and grandkids are believers. Because this man who was an ardent atheist, his life turned around. And he has gone from that Skeptics Club, and now we live in different cities, different parts of California. But this man has started several Skeptics Clubs of his own to deal with people. And his son is now starting a Skeptics Club for people his age. So that's why it's one of my favorite examples, Eric, because there's ripple effects. You know, you love one person into the kingdom by really connecting them with something they're passionate about. Their lives are turned around. Well, they ripple that with others, and then all of a sudden you've got a whole family, a whole clan that's transformed. That's a beautiful thing.
Well, I think it's an extraordinary example. We have in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, a friend of mine, Dan Arsenault, that has a Sunday morning program called Church for Skeptics. And it airs alongside of the Gardendale First Baptist Church, 2,800 with the big choir, and airs across from Tuscaloosa Baptist with their 3,000 and their big choir. And they're stuck on one of the channels is Church for Skeptics. And he has devoted his life to the skeptic, to the one who thinks that they have the argument, the proof positive, the absolute belief that God does not exist. And that is the one that he says, bring it. You are the ones that I want to talk to. We tend to gravitate towards people that believe us, agree with us, and who like the same things we like. But when it comes to the gospel message, Jesus made it very clear that he didn't go to the healthy, he went to the sick. And we've become a place that isn't really all that inviting to the sick. Our churches are not all that inviting anymore to those that are really questioning, because we've gotten to the point where the churches are so big that the person walking in and walking out of the door has had an encounter with AMC theaters. They haven't had an encounter with Jesus. And that comes through that relationship building. And I think that you have captured a lot of that in this book that's been released, 31 Surprising Reasons to Believe in God by Rick Stedman. How superheroes, how environmental, all the things that impact our lives every day are useful tools as not only conversation starters, but faith builders. So, Dr. Rick Stedman, thank you. Thank you for publishing this book. Thank you for our good friend Gene Wynn over at Win-Win Media and our good friends at Harvest House for sending us 31 Surprising Reasons to Believe in God by Rick Stedman. And you can follow him at rickstedman.com. That's rickstedman.com, and get resources, resource material, and even regular updates from Rick as to new ideas, new projects, and new ways to apply. I know he would love to hear from you, and we would love to see you again. So thank you for being here with us on Revealing the Truth.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth. We'll be right back.